Witching Beyonce. Did Queen Bee practice witchcraft on one of her musicians? In this Daily Mail TV exclusive, the drummer who claims she was put under Beyonce's spell is now speaking out.
The fact that people keep saying I'm crazy, hell, the situations I had to deal with and survive are...
She is kicking his behind. And the security guard's trying to hold her back. Beyonce's next to Jay-Z in the corner. And I know you've seen this footage before, and you know that Beyonce waited a long time before she stepped in between them. Yes, she almost kicked him in his area, but he caught it. This was at, as you might know by now, the after party to the Met Gala. It was at a place here in Manhattan called the Standard Hotel. The hotel is upset because the footage even got out, because this is supposed to be a place that caters to celebrities. But who
The internet didn't just react this time, it erupted. Because the moment Ray J started hinting at behind-the-scenes stories involving Beyonce and Jay-Z, everything changed. What began as vague comments and speculation suddenly turned into a full-blown online storm, with fans, blogs, and commentators trying to decode every word, every clip, every past moment. But here's where it gets intense, because none of this was clearly confirmed. No direct statements, no verified evidence, just fragments, hints, and a wave of interpretation that spread faster than anyone could control. And in today's world, that's all it takes. One voice speaking out, one clip going viral. And suddenly, years of old interviews, past controversies, and forgotten rumors start resurfacing all at once. That's exactly what happened here. People didn't just listen to what Ray J said, they started digging, bringing up the Solange elevator incident, revisiting old industry stories, analyzing past lyrics, and connecting dots that may or may not even be connected. And as the narrative grew, one idea kept getting pushed, that there's more going on behind the scenes than the public sees. Now, whether that's true or not, that's where things get complicated. Because while the internet was building this massive storyline, Beyonce herself remained silent, at least publicly. No response, no reaction, no acknowledgement of the rumors spreading across timelines. In that silence, it didn't calm things down. It made them louder. Because in a space where people expect instant responses, silence gets interpreted in 100 different ways. Some see it as control, others see it as strategy, and some take it as confirmation of something deeper. Meanwhile, the conversation kept growing, not just about what Ray J said, but about why he said it now, why these stories are resurfacing again, and whether this is just internet noise or the start of something bigger. So now the real question isn't just what was said, it's this: what happens when speculation becomes a full narrative and nobody steps in to stop it? Because if this continues the way it's going, this won't just stay a rumor. It could turn into something much harder to contain. Before you can understand why this situation feels so explosive right now, you have to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Because what's happening between Ray J and the conversation surrounding Beyonce didn't just appear overnight. It's the result of years of history, public perception, and a pattern the internet has repeated again and again. Let's start with Beyonce. Because when you're talking about her, you're not just talking about an artist, you're talking about one of the most controlled and carefully managed public images in modern entertainment. For years, Beyonce has built a reputation that's almost untouchable, private, calculated, and always intentional. She doesn't overshare, she doesn't react to every headline, and most importantly, she doesn't let the public see everything. And that's exactly why situations like this hit harder. Because when someone who rarely speaks gets pulled into a loud, chaotic narrative, the contrast alone creates attention. Now add Jay-Z into that picture. Together, they've been seen as one of the most powerful couples in the industry. Not just because of music, but because of influence, business, and longevity. Their story has had ups and downs, public ones, but they've always managed to keep control of how much the world actually sees. Even moments like the Solange elevator incident, one of the most viral and talked about situations, were handled quickly, quietly, and without turning into a long public back and forth. A short statement, minimal explanation, and then silence. In that silence, it became part of their brand. Because over time, people started associating that silence with power, with control, with the idea that not everything needs to be explained. But here's where things start to shift. Because in today's environment, silence doesn't always work the same way it used to. Now, let's bring Ray J into this. Because his role in the situation is completely different. Ray J has always operated in a more open, unpredictable space. He speaks, reacts, shares stories, and doesn't necessarily follow the same controlled image approach that Beyonce and Jay-Z are known for. And that difference? That's what makes this situation volatile. Because when someone who is vocal starts hinting at things involving someone who is silent, the imbalance creates tension. Now people aren't just listening to what's being said, they're paying attention to what's not being said. And that's where the narrative begins to grow. Because from what's been circulating, Ray J didn't come out with a clean, structured statement. He didn't present clear evidence or a direct accusation. Instead, he hinted, he implied, he referenced things in a way that left room for interpretation. And that's exactly what fuels the internet. Because the internet doesn't need full information. It just needs a starting point. Once that starting point exists, everything else follows. People begin digging. Old clips resurface. Past interviews get reanalyzed. Moments that were once ignored suddenly get new meaning attached to them. And before you know it, a full narrative is built. That's what's happening here. Because this isn't just about what Ray J said. It's about what people think he meant. Now, here's where it gets even more layered. Because the internet has a pattern. Every time someone even hints at industry secrets or hidden truths, the reaction is always the same. People start connecting everything. They don't just look at the current situation. They go back, years back, looking for anything that fits the narrative being built. And in this case, that includes past relationship rumors, old industry rivalries, business decisions, viral moments that were never fully explained. All of it gets pulled into the same conversation, not because it's confirmed, but because it fits. And when enough pieces seem to fit, even loosely, it starts to feel real. Now think about the impact of that. Because when multiple unrelated stories get connected, it creates something powerful, the illusion of a pattern. And once people believe there's a pattern, they stop questioning individual details. They start accepting the bigger story. That's exactly where this situation is heading. Now let's talk about timing. Because timing is one of the most important factors in stories like this. These kinds of narratives don't always take off on their own. They need a trigger, a moment, a reason for people to start paying attention again. And right now, that trigger is Ray J speaking. Even if what he's saying isn't fully clear, even if it's just hints, it's enough to restart conversations that had faded. And once those conversations come back, they don't stay the same. They evolve, they grow, they become louder. Now here's the key detail that makes this situation different from others. Beyonce isn't engaging, at least not publicly. No response, no clarification, no attempt to shut anything down. And in a normal situation, that might slow things down. But here, it does the opposite. Because silence creates space, and the internet fills that space immediately. With theories, with assumptions, with narratives that expand faster than facts. So now we're at a point where one side is speaking or hinting, the other side is silent, and the audience is building the story in between. That's a powerful combination because it removes control from the people involved and gives it to the audience. And once the audience takes control of the narrative, things don't stay simple. They escalate because every new detail, real or assumed, gets added to the story. Every reaction, direct or indirect, gets interpreted. Every moment becomes part of something bigger. And that's what you're seeing right now. This isn't just a situation. It's a buildup, a collision between a controlled image, an unpredictable voice, and an audience that's connecting everything in real time. And when those three elements come together, the result is never quiet. It's loud, it's messy, and most importantly, it keeps growing. So now the stage is set. The narrative is building. And whatever happens next, it's not going to stay contained. Everything up to this point has been build-up hints, reactions, resurfaced clips, and a growing narrative that the internet is piecing together in real time. But this is where things shift from speculation into conflict. Because the moment Ray J started speaking in a way that suggested there might be more going on behind the scenes involving Beyonce and Jay-Z, the reaction didn't just grow, it divided. And that's when the real tension begins. On one side, you had people leaning all the way in. Viewers who believe that when someone from inside the industry starts hinting at things, there's always something behind it. To them, Ray J wasn't just talking randomly, he was pointing toward a bigger truth, something that hasn't been openly discussed but exists beneath the surface. From that perspective, every word he said, even if vague, carried weight. But on the other side, there was pushback. Strong pushback. Because a lot of people weren't convinced. They saw it differently. They questioned the timing, the clarity, and most importantly, the lack of actual proof. To them, this wasn't exposure. It was interpretation. A situation where hints were being stretched into full narratives without anything concrete holding them together. And that split, that's what creates conflict. Because now the conversation isn't just about what Ray J said. It's about whether it means anything at all. And once that debate starts, it pulls in everything else. Now here's where the first major twist hits. Because while all eyes were initially on Ray J, attention suddenly shifts. Not to a response, but to the lack of one. Because Beyonce stays silent. No public reaction, no statement, no clarification. And in today's environment, that silence doesn't calm things down. It amplifies them. Because people don't interpret silence as nothing. They interpret it as something. Some see it as control, choosing not to engage with noise. Others see it as strategy, avoiding giving attention to something that might fade on its own. But then there's another group, the ones who take silence as confirmation. Not factual confirmation, but emotional confirmation. The idea that if something wasn't worth addressing, it would have been shut down already. And that's where things get complicated. Because now the story isn't just being driven by what was said, it's being driven by what wasn't said. That's the twist. Because in a situation like this, silence becomes part of the narrative. Now let's go deeper. Because once people locked into the idea that something might be happening behind the scenes, they didn't stop at Ray J's comments. They started digging. And when the internet digs, it doesn't do it halfway. Old moments started resurfacing again. The Solange elevator incident brought back into the spotlight, reanalyzed through a completely different lens. Past interviews, old lyrics, industry stories that had faded over time, all of it pulled back into the conversation. And here's the key detail. None of these things were new, but the way they were being interpreted, that was new. Because now they weren't being looked at individually. They were being connected. And once enough connections are made, even loosely, it creates the illusion of a pattern. And once people believe there's a pattern, they stop questioning the pieces. They focus on the bigger picture. That's what's happening right now. Now the narrative isn't, Ray J said something. It becomes, all of these things might be connected. And that's a much stronger, much more engaging story. Now bring Jay-Z into this. Because even without speaking, his presence adds weight. His history, his influence, his past public admissions, like acknowledging mistakes in his relationship, become part of how people interpret everything else. Again, not as proof, but as context. And context is powerful, because it gives people a reason to believe that what they're seeing could be true. Now here's where the conflict deepens even more. Because while the internet is building this layered narrative, there's still no direct confrontation, no back and forth, no clear escalation between the people involved. And that creates a strange dynamic, because the conflict exists, but it's being driven almost entirely by the audience. People are reacting to something that hasn't been fully defined. And yet, the reactions are real, emotional, strong. Now, let's shift back to Ray J for a second. Because his role in this becomes more complicated the longer the situation continues. At first, he's seen as the one introducing the narrative, the voice starting the conversation. But as the story grows beyond what he originally said, he loses control of it. Because now the internet is adding layers he didn't explicitly confirm, connecting dots he didn't clearly connect. And that's another twist, because the story is no longer his. It belongs to the audience now. And the audience doesn't slow down. Now, look at how this all comes together. You have a statement filled with hints, a response that never comes, a past that keeps resurfacing, an audience connecting everything. That combination creates something powerful, momentum. And momentum doesn't need confirmation to keep going. It feeds on attention, speculation, debate. And right now, all three are at their peak. So now we're at a point where the original situation is no longer the main focus. It's everything built around it. the interpretations, the theories, the emotional reactions. And that's what makes this the most critical moment in the story, because this is where things either slow down or spiral even further. And based on what we're seeing, it's not slowing down, it's expanding, because every new person who hears about this adds their own perspective, their own interpretation, their own version of the story. And the more versions exist, the harder it becomes to separate narrative from reality. So now the question isn't just, what did Ray J mean? It becomes, what is this situation turning into? Because if this continues the way it's going, it won't just be a moment. It will become a full narrative that people believe, whether it's confirmed or not. And just when it feels like you understand what's happening, that's when the next twist starts forming. And just when it felt like the situation couldn't get any more intense, that's when everything escalated in a way nobody expected. Because up until now, the entire narrative had been built on hints, reactions, and resurfaced moments. It was loud, yes, but still operating in that gray area where nothing is fully confirmed. But then something shifted. The conversation stopped being about what Ray J said and started becoming about what people believe he exposed about Beyonce and Jay-Z. And that difference, that's what pushed this into a completely different level. Because once people think something has been revealed, they don't go back to neutral. They move forward as if it's real, even if it's based on interpretation. Now the narrative isn't, Ray J hinted at something. It becomes, he exposed something. And that shift, that's the escalation. Because now, everything gets reinterpreted through that lens. Old interviews don't feel like interviews anymore. They feel like clues. Past controversies don't feel isolated, they feel connected. Even moments that had nothing to do with the current situation suddenly get pulled in and treated as part of a bigger story. That's when things start spiraling. Now here's where the shocking reveal begins to take shape. Because as this narrative grows, people start noticing something deeper. This situation might not be driven by facts at all. It might be driven by pattern perception. Let that sink in. Because once enough unrelated moments are grouped together, they start to look connected, even if they aren't. And that's exactly what's happening here. You have the Solange elevator incident, old relationship rumors, industry speculation, viral clips, Ray J's recent comments. Individually, these are separate moments, but together, they create the illusion of a single narrative. And once people see that narrative, they believe it. That's the shocking reveal. Because the power of this situation isn't coming from confirmed information. It's coming from how convincing the connections feel. Now, here's where it gets even more intense. Because while all of this is happening publicly, there's still no direct response from Beyonce. No statement, no denial, no acknowledgement. In that silence, it becomes louder than anything being said. Because now people aren't just analyzing what exists, they're analyzing the absence of a response. Some see it as control, choosing not to engage with speculation. Others see it as strategy, letting the noise pass without giving it energy. But then there's another group, the ones who interpret silence as confirmation, not factual confirmation, but emotional confirmation. The idea that if something wasn't real, it would be addressed immediately. And once that belief spreads, the narrative becomes even stronger. Now bring Ray J back into the picture. Because at this point, his role starts to change. He's no longer just the one who introduced the conversation. He becomes the trigger for everything that follows. Because whether intentional or not, his words created a chain reaction. And that reaction is now bigger than what he originally said. That's another twist. Because the story has outgrown its source. It's no longer controlled by him, or by Beyonce, or by Jay-Z. It's being controlled by the audience. And the audience doesn't slow down. Now, let's zoom out. Because what we're really seeing isn't just a celebrity situation. It's a system, a cycle, where a hint becomes a theory becomes a narrative becomes a belief, and once belief takes over, facts become secondary. That's the level this situation has reached. Now here's the part that makes it unpredictable. Because when a narrative is built on interpretation instead of confirmation, it can go in any direction. Any new clip, any new comment, any new moment can completely change how the story is perceived. And that's where the tension comes from. Because right now, there's no clear ending, no resolution, just a narrative that keeps expanding every time people engage with it. Now think about what happens next. Because if even one new piece of information surfaces, real or not, it will immediately be pulled into the existing narrative, connected, amplified, turned into proof. And that's what makes this so intense. Because the story doesn't need new facts to grow, it just needs new moments to interpret. So now we're at a point where the original comments don't matter as much. The reactions do. The interpretations do. The belief does. And that belief, it's stronger than anything confirmed so far. That's the shocking reveal. Because this situation isn't being driven by what actually happened, it's being driven by what people are convinced happened. And that's far more powerful. Because when belief takes over, there's no limit to how far the story can go. And just when it feels like this is the peak, that's when the final turn begins. By the time this situation hit full momentum, the reaction wasn't just loud, it was split into completely different realities. Because people weren't reacting to one clear, confirmed event, they were reacting to a narrative that had grown around Beyonce, Jay-Z, and Ray J. And that's what made everything feel so intense. On the public side, things moved exactly how you'd expect, but amplified. Social media didn't just respond, it took control of the story. Within hours, people had already picked sides, even though nothing had been clearly confirmed. One side believed something real had been exposed. To them, Ray J wasn't just speaking randomly, he was hinting at deeper industry truths. They pointed to how quickly old stories resurfaced, how multiple past moments seemed to connect, and how the narrative felt too consistent to ignore. From that perspective, this wasn't coincidence, it was a pattern. But on the other side, there was skepticism, a lot of it, because many people stepped back and questioned everything. They pointed out that none of these claims were verified, that the connections being made were mostly based on interpretation, and that the internet has a history of turning small hints into massive, exaggerated stories. And that's where the divide really took shape. Because now the conversation wasn't just about Beyonce or Ray J anymore, it became about how people decide what's real online. Some trust patterns, others trust proof. And when those two mindsets collide, you get exactly what's happening here, a constant back and forth that keeps the story alive. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Because alongside serious debate, something else started happening. The situation became entertainment. Memes flooded timelines. People started recreating moments. Short clips were edited to look more dramatic. Old footage like the Solange elevator incident was reposted with new captions, new meanings, and new assumptions attached to it. And once a story turns into meme culture, it doesn't fade. It evolves. Because memes don't just react, they extend the life of the narrative. They keep it circulating long after the original moment should have passed. Now shift over to the industry side. Because this is where the reaction becomes quieter, but more revealing. Unlike the public, where everyone reacts instantly, people within the industry move carefully. They understand that speaking on situations like this, especially when it involves names this big, can have consequences. So, instead of direct statements, you get silence or indirect commentary, general conversations about how rumors spread, how narratives get out of control, and why people should be careful with what they believe. Nothing specific, nothing directly aimed, but definitely aware. In that silence, it usually signals one thing. There's more complexity here than what's being shown publicly. Because when something involves high-profile figures like Beyonce and Jay-Z, industry insiders don't jump into speculation. They observe. They wait. They let things unfold before attaching themselves to any version of the story. Now let's bring Ray J back into the reaction. Because while the public is divided, his role in the narrative becomes more complicated by the minute. At first, he's seen as the one starting the conversation, the voice introducing the idea that something deeper might exist. But as the narrative grows beyond what he actually said, he becomes something else, a trigger. Because now, even things he didn't explicitly confirm are being linked back to him. People are building layers onto his words, expanding them into a story that's much bigger than the original comments. In that shift, it changes how people see him. Some view him as exposing something. Others see him as being misunderstood or taken out of context. In that disagreement, it adds even more fuel to the story. Now zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Because what we're really seeing isn't just reactions to a celebrity situation. It's a reflection of how modern culture processes information. One group builds narratives from patterns. Another group demands proof before believing anything. And both engage with the story in completely different ways. That creates momentum. Because no matter which side someone is on, they're still participating, still reacting, still keeping the narrative alive. And that's the key. Because in a situation like this, attention matters more than confirmation. The more people talk about it, the bigger it gets. The more it spreads, the more real it feels, even if nothing new is actually confirmed. So now we're at a point where the original comments are no longer the focus. The reactions are, the debates are, the interpretations are, and that's what keeps everything moving. Because as long as people keep arguing, analyzing, and reacting, this story doesn't end. It evolves. And based on how divided the public already is, whatever comes next, it's going to hit even harder. And just when it feels like the story has reached its peak, when the clips have circulated, the reactions have settled into sides, and everyone thinks they've figured it out, that's when the narrative takes one final turn that flips everything. Because up to now, the entire conversation has been built around one assumption, that Ray J said something that exposed deeper truths about Beyonce and Jay-Z. That's the version people are reacting to. That's the version spreading. But here's the twist. What if that version isn't the real story? What if the real story isn't about what was exposed, but about how fast people decided it was exposed? Because when you strip everything back, remove the edits, the captions, the commentary, the assumptions, you're left with something much simpler. A few statements, a few reactions, a lot of interpretation, nothing clearly confirmed. And yet, somehow, it turned into a full narrative about secrets, power, and hidden realities. That's the shift. Because this situation might not be escalating because of what actually happened, it might be escalating because of what people believe happened. And that changes everything. Because once belief takes over, facts become optional. Now look at how this plays out. Every time Beyonce appears somewhere, it gets analyzed. Every time Jay-Z is mentioned, it gets connected. Every time Ray J says anything, even unrelated, it gets pulled back into the same narrative. Not because it is connected, but because people decide it is. That's not coincidence anymore. That's a system, a loop, where a moment happens. People interpret it. The interpretation spreads. The spread becomes belief. And once belief is strong enough, it doesn't need new evidence to survive. That's the real twist. Because at this point, the story isn't being driven by Beyonce. It's not being driven by Jay-Z. And it's not even being driven by Ray J anymore. It's being driven by the audience. Millions of people watching, reacting, posting, analyzing, and adding their own version of the story into the mix. And the more versions that exist, the harder it becomes to separate narrative from reality. Now here's where it gets even deeper. Because if the audience is controlling the narrative, then this story doesn't have a fixed ending. It doesn't stop with a statement. It doesn't end with confirmation or denial. Because it's not built on facts. It's built on attention. And attention doesn't end. It shifts. It looks for the next moment to attach itself to. That's why this feels unfinished. Because it is. Every new clip, every new comment, every new post becomes an opportunity for the story to grow again. Now bring it back to Ray J. Because even though he started the conversation, he no longer controls it. His words have already been expanded, interpreted, and reshaped into something bigger than what he originally said. That's another twist. Because once the internet takes a narrative, it doesn't give it back. Now look at Beyonce's position. Because her silence, whether intentional or not, has become part of the story itself. Not responding doesn't remove her from the narrative. It places her at the center of it in a different way. Because people aren't just reacting to what's being said about her, they're reacting to what she isn't saying. And that creates endless possibilities, endless interpretations, endless versions of the same story. Now zoom out one last time. Because what we're witnessing isn't just a celebrity situation anymore. It's a reflection of something bigger. How quickly a narrative can form, how strongly people can believe it, and how hard it becomes to stop once it starts. So here's the cliffhanger that leaves everything open. Because if this story is being driven by belief, then what happens when the next moment hits? What happens when something new surfaces, real or not? Does the narrative grow? Does it change? Or does it flip into something completely different overnight? Because in a situation like this, that's always possible. So now the real question isn't, what did Ray J expose? The real question is, what will people believe he exposed next? Because at this point, belief isn't following the story, it's creating it. Now this is where I need you to really tap in, because this situation isn't just something you watch, it's something you interpret. After everything we just broke down, the way Ray J's comments sparked a wave of theories, how the internet pulled Beyonce and Jay-Z back into old conversations, and how quickly speculation turned into a full narrative, the real question is sitting right in front of you. What do you actually believe is going on? Do you think this is something deeper being hinted at behind the scenes? Or do you think this is the internet doing what it always does, connecting dots that might not even be connected? I want you to go down to the comments right now and give your honest take, but don't just pick a side, break it down. Tell me what you're seeing, what you're noticing, and why you think the narrative is going in the direction it is. Because the truth is, situations like this don't just reveal things about celebrities. They reveal how we process information. Now, let me ask you something even bigger. If most of what we see online is built on interpretation, then how much of what we believe is actually real? Think about that. Because this isn't just about one story anymore, it's about how stories are created, spread, and turned into truth in real time. If you made it this far, hit that like button so I know you want more breakdowns like this where we don't just follow the narrative, we actually analyze it. And make sure you subscribe, because the next video is going even deeper, breaking down how viral stories like this are built and why they keep pulling millions of people in. Turn on notifications too, because the moment something new drops, you already know we're going to be right here breaking it down first. This story isn't over, and now you're part of it.